Imagine looking at your business and you've got a heat map of where sales are coming from across your different platforms. And you were to see and you're like, I'm spending an hour, 2 hours a day on Instagram generating stuff and posting stuff. But actually, I've made one sale on Instagram and I've made 58 sales on Twitter through an email opt-in. If in your business you could know where every sale has come from and know which platforms and sources of your content and marketing are the ones that are generating the most sales, converting the best, and which ones you should lean into.
So we used to do none of this. I don't really know what it was that caused us to start doing it. But
probably once you started running ads and started to run into the problem of, was that an organic sale? Like the person says it was, but I think they clicked on this ad. And
that's a great way to describe it. So one of the problems with advertising is if you're using any kind of sales sequence that involves more than one step, which is most things, right? So someone will opt in and then a week later or 2 weeks later or a year later, they buy something. It would be nice to know, it was that ad that I was running a year ago that created that sale. But the ad platform doesn't track that. So the ad platform generally, like you'll look at your Facebook ads or your Google ads or whatever on a single day, and it'll say you've got this many leads from this amount of spend. And it's a little bit like, well, is that working or is that not working? So that's when we started doing it. But it then gets even more noisy when you also do stuff on social media, or you have multiple platforms and you have more stuff going on. So I think before I get into explaining this, the first thing that I think is really important that everybody has is some kind of CRM. So we use ActiveCampaign. There's lots of similar bits of software. Some are more complicated and more expensive. Some are more simple. But somewhere where people who are opting in and coming through the virtual doors of your business go, so that you can start to look at, well, where did they come from? And then what causes them to make a buying decision.
Just for anyone who's like, what's a CRM? Or I've kind of heard of it, but I'm not quite sure. It's just a database. It's just a series of entries of, here's a name, they're on an email list, you can contact them, it'll keep a record of previous interactions that you've had with them. So it's kind of like, if you were to say, what's your personal version of a CRM, you're probably using one, which is your messages app and your contact app. Like, if you go to text someone, it'll show you all the previous texts that you've had with that person. It's kind of a social CRM.
I think it just means client relationship manager, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Customer relationship manager. Yeah, exactly. So like in ActiveCampaign, let's say someone buys, we can click on their profile, we can see which lists they're in, what caused them to opt in, when they opted in, how many emails they've received. We score them based on their engagement. We can see any one-to-one back and forth. So maybe they emailed us a year ago and Yusuf replied or whatever. We can see all of that in one place. And so we can reasonably confidently, and disclosure, we do what I'm about to describe is a simplified version of what we do. We make this a lot more complicated, but we can generally see they came from this place originally, and this thing caused them to make a buying decision. This thing is kind of a trigger event, and then we have the initial source. And so why is all of this important? If you think of it as you are the captain of this ship, and you are just deciding, I have these resources, so I have time and money, and I have to allocate that in some way to try and grow the business, to try and make things move more efficiently. It's really, you can't do everything, and that's the problem. Like we could do even more. We do a lot of stuff. We could do even more things than we do. We could run different types of content, different types of ads on different platforms. We've arrived at the things we've arrived at because we're pretty confident that those things generate sales. And if you have no idea what's working, what isn't working, the kind of heartbreaking thing that can happen is you spend years doing things that don't actually generate sales. Maybe you think they do, but they don't. So we'll speak to a lot of people who say, I post on Instagram every day and I get some signups, but actually the signups are just coming from word of mouth and referral, and they could have done nothing on Instagram.
Yeah, that is painful.
Hours and hours wasted.
Especially considering how time costly Instagram is.
Yeah.
And Instagram doesn't mind because you're doing free labor for them. You're creating a nice experience for everyone who's scrolling the feed, spending ages making these like little sketch videos for reels and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I guess the other equally heartbreaking problem that you've highlighted there is not just because everything works, and actually, really, if all you did was post on Instagram, you'd make some sales. But it's knowing for the chips that you have available, how many sales does it make per unit of effort? Because everything works, but there will be some things that work better than others.
Yeah. And obviously that's important when you're spending your time on these platforms. It's especially important when you're spending money on these platforms, because like if you've got £1,000 in your business and you're going to spend all of it, you want to make sure that, and that's your ads testing budget, for example, you want to make absolutely sure that at the very end of it, at least you have data over like that ad and that targeting option, that's what brought in the sales. And so that if the next time you spend £1,000, let's say maybe 900 of it was wasted on things that didn't work, but 100 of it brought in 3 sales and the highest quality leads. And you have to have some tracking set up to be able to know that. So the sort of the simple version of this stuff to take away and maybe apply today, regardless of what tracking or how advanced you want to make this, you want to start noting down your initial source and trigger source of sales. Now, by initial source, I just mean, and this is why you need a CRM, because you can see these things. By initial source, I just mean what caused your customer to opt in. So where are they from? Did they opt in from Instagram? Did they opt in from YouTube? Was it an ad that you ran on Facebook? If so, which ad was it? And if you want to get into that in more detail, you can look up something called UTM tracking. You can just Google that. It's very boring, but it works. So where have they come from? And you can then plan long-term around this. So if we found out, for example, and something we know, interestingly, is that a lot of business customers come from our podcast, because we give you various links and links to click on, and we can track where you opt in from. And we know that the people who come from the podcast end up being really good customers, because if you can sit and listen to us talk about this for a long time, chances are if you pay to work with us, you will also sit and listen to us for a long time and therefore get good results. So that's sort of the source, like the origin, which platform are people on before they enter your world. And that's the first thing to pay attention to.
And presumably you're coming on to this, but how do you identify the source?
So this is where it gets a little bit complicated, and it kind of depends on how much effort you want to put into this. So you can make it as simple as each source or each platform that you want to track has its own landing page, for example. So that's the really basics. It's kind of bloated and complicated, but you might have a landing page that you only link to from Instagram. You might have a landing page that you only link to from YouTube. You might have a landing page that's only linked to your ads. And then when people opt in via that link in ActiveCampaign or whatever software you're using, they would just be tagged with Instagram or YouTube or ads. And
so
then
practically that would just be like joeblogsfitnesscompany.com/Instagram. And if you're using WordPress or ClickFunnels or something, you can create that page, which is identical to all the other landing pages, but you only put that one on your Instagram bio. And you say link in bio. When someone opts in, there's an instruction on that page on the back end that when someone enters their email address, it goes Instagram. And then if you were to look up that person in your CRM, you'll see where they came from. And you could even tag it as first click Instagram.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and the reason why it's important to track this yourself and not ask people, because this is the mistake people make, is like, hey, where did you first hear about us? Because we know where people actually first hear about us, whenever we ask them that question, they're usually wrong. They usually misremember, right? Because people have like a recency bias. So they might have seen a post on Instagram from us that caused them to get in touch. And they might say like, oh, I think I follow you guys on Instagram. But actually, it was a Facebook ad 2 years ago. Or
it's not an easy question. Like, where did you first hear about Martin Berkhan or Mike Israetel?
Elite FTS, Martin Berkhan.
Okay.
Mike Israetel, that is a good question.
I'm impressed you know where you found out about Berkhan.
I can remember the article.
Wow.
I can remember the article. I can remember it was about 16/8 fasting. And I just remember reading about this guy who was like super, super lean and thinking like, who is this?
Well, thanks for bloody ruining my example there. But
Sorry. But you know, the thing is, I might be wrong.
Yeah, if we were to look on, if they had 20 years of UTM data.
Yeah. Well, Elite FDS fucked it because they didn't opt in. So
terrible. But like there's people who you could mention, or, you know, I don't know, Ben Carpenter, like no idea. Like I'm going to say Instagram because that's the most recent memory of him, but I doubt it is.
So this is the thing. So like someone buys from you and you ask them on a survey, hey, where did you first hear about me? And they say Instagram, but actually it was an article you wrote on your website 2 years ago. You look at that and go, right, I need to do more Instagram. But actually you need to do more articles, right? Because that's the source of like, how do I go onto the internet and find more people who are going to buy from me, right? That's the problem we're trying to solve. And not what stuff did I do today that made them sign up, but rather like, which pond are they in? I'll go fish there, right? I'll go set up camp and just camp there and fish there. And I'm just going to do that because everything else is a waste of time. So that's why it's important to track that, because people don't remember, especially if there's a long sales cycle. The thing that you can ask people, and again, you can track this using some other bits of software and tools. It gets very complicated though, is you want to track the trigger source or the trigger event. So let's say they signed up yesterday, what caused that to happen? And then the gap between those two things, so the opt-in or the original source event and the trigger event, that is your sales cycle length, right? So when someone enters your CRM and when someone buys from you, if you track those two things, and you can do this in Active Campaign, so when someone opts in, you can fill out a custom field saying, make this field today's date when they opt in, and then when they buy, make this field today's date. So then on everybody's profile, you'll have opt-in date and buy date, and you'll be able to calculate, if you want to do this, and if you're like me and you get excited about stuff like this, you can export all that data and look at the average buying cycle. So how long does it take people when they opt in or find out about you to then make a buying decision? You'll probably find that it's about 14 days, interestingly, which is about the same length or exactly the same length as the challenge that we teach people to run for a very good reason. But interesting. But yeah, so you can then, and that's something that you can't ask people about. So on the like a survey or a questionnaire when someone signs up, you can say like, what was it that prompted you to sign up today? Usually people can remember that one, right? They'll say it was a chat in DMs, or it was an email you sent, or it was a podcast you did, and that's sometimes where you can get an insight that you maybe wouldn't have got even if you were tracking things.
So that's a much more memorable moment. Like whenever I've signed up for someone's coaching or whatever, there's been a moment where I might have seen something of theirs and I go, right, fuck this, I'm signing up for a coach. And that's really powerful, and keeping track of where those things happen and replicating more of them is really key. Yeah. So I guess in your pond analogy, the pond is where the fish that you're looking for are swimming.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the trigger source, and you want to identify
the original source.
Where are they? The original source. The initial,
yeah.
And then the trigger source, the thing that caused them to buy, is like the fly on the end of the rod or the worm.
Yeah, it's like the bait. Yeah, but or even more so, it's like the fishing technique. It's like, well, I tried this rod and that didn't work, so I'm going to try this net. So I'm going to try a trawler. I'm going to try grenades. I'm going to drain all the water in the pond. Oh fuck, that was a step too far. So yeah. So like the trouble with looking at trigger source though is that, again, this is kind of the problem with attribution, is that people overweight the trigger source and they think that that's what caused it. So they'll say, I posted on Instagram and 3 people signed up, right? But actually the reason that those 3 people signed up was that it's the end of December, people are looking to get in shape anyway, and those people have been following you because of your Twitter account, and they just happened to see something on Instagram and they signed up. So you place loads of emphasis on the Instagram account and that post you did, when actually it was kind of broader factors. So that's why it's important to track both of them. Where are people coming from? Go on.
Sorry, can I just add, because I think this is a really important point that loads of people miss, and this sounds like a really kind of boring, advanced concept of running your online fitness business that people don't need to care about, but actually it's the root of many problems, and it's the root of what we call Jordian's knot, which is a concept we've picked up, where you can end up doing well or doing badly in your business and not knowing why, because you haven't got this nailed down. So it is actually really important. And when the reason that we rag on a lot of kind of high ticket style business gurus is not because of the business model per se, but it's because the people who are successful using their business model tend to misattribute their sales. So you look at their testimonial reel, and there's often some kind of influencer type person who's already got a big organic audience that they've warmed up for a long time, and they'll make a 30K month on their first month. And then that becomes the testimonial for the business guru with no follow-up for what's happened to them 3 months later or 6 months later. And all that's happened is the business guru has told them to post a call to action post that's basically taken the trawler and swept the fish that are already warm and ready to buy, and sold them a bunch of upfront high priced programs. So that's going to generate a lot of upfront cash, but that's not a reliable mechanism to keep making sales after that.
And it's easier to charge a higher price if you have an established brand and you've been doing something for a long time. So if you're well known, if you're in great shape, if you've got 100,000 followers and you post saying like, hey, brand new program, book a free call with me, you'll probably get some free calls. And if the script is like a decent sales script, you'll probably make some sales of something that's expensive. And so you look at that and go, wow, this model must work. But does that work for someone who has got 100 followers online and has never done a sales call and who has no brand, no testimonials? Like, not really. It's a very different thing. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's easy to say, well, that was the method, but actually it was lots of other things. So it wasn't the post, it wasn't the script, it wasn't anything that was taught to them really. It was the 5 years of work they put in prior, but they're overweighting the trigger event in this instance. So there are two, like, once you know this information, so let's say, and you have to really, this is something you have to set up and leave it running in the background. So tracking where initial opt-ins come from, tracking the events that cause people to buy, looking at what your sales cycle is, and then you can start to build things around two situations. So firstly is the average. So what is the average time to buy? Let's build a funnel or a system that's going to capture that. So it takes most people 14 days to buy, which is I almost guarantee is what you'll find. 14 days to buy, let's build a system that captures that. But also you'll see some examples of people that take 8 months to buy. So do I have systems to capture those? You might see some examples where it takes someone 1 day to buy. What system do you have in place for that? And you can start to build these kind of processes in your business that capture these different buying styles and these different behaviors. But without any attribution, you're just guessing. You're like, oh, well, I'll just keep posting on Instagram. And again, you only have so much time. It's only you probably in the business. If you could be running your business in a way where you're intelligently building these systems and automations to grow things over time, and instead you're just kind of like frantically posting and hoping something works. So it's two very, very different approaches. One of them probably sounds a bit intimidating and sounds a bit boring, and it's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to spend the time on Canva. But the person who does go ahead and build those processes in a year's time, the gap between those two situations is hard to measure. It's vast.
Imagine looking at your business in a year's time on your annual review, and you've got a heat map of where sales are coming from across your different platforms. And you were to see, and you're like, I'm spending an hour, 2 hours a day on Instagram generating stuff and posting stuff. But actually, I've made 1 sale on Instagram and I've made 58 sales on Twitter through an email opt-in.
Yep.
Well, like, how much easier is it to grow a Twitter account? So much easier. You can pretty much automate it. I've got a video coming up about that soon. So then you've suddenly freed up 1 or 2 hours a day to focus on that. And that's where you can start to build the other pieces of your business to funnel stuff towards that.
It'll change how you see advertising as well. So we have some keywords, some audiences, some on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube and Google that we just know work. They work short term, so they generate as customers now. But more importantly, they generate customers over 6 months or a year. So there'll be people who buy today who opted in from a certain audience this time last year. And I might have looked at an ad or an audience this time last year and thought, oh, that's not working, I'll turn it off. But once you have this attribution tracking set up, you can see the long tail effect of things. So you start seeing like where you're putting your time into and where you're investing money into as this, you're kind of building this snowball that's gathering momentum over time. It's just, where do I apply that time and that effort and that money? So it's making those decisions intelligently, and then just kind of being okay with the fact that there'll be ups and downs. But as long as I'm putting my time and my money into the right buckets, over time that's going to grow, because I know that what I'm doing has some attributed sales and success attached to it.
Sales attribution, everyone. So admin@propanefitness.com. Send us an email with Propane Business Podcast
as the subject line,
and you'll be able to bypass the booking limit, the booking notice period, and get in touch with us sooner.
Yeah. And it'll be a good time. I guarantee you'll have a good time.
You could book it at 4 a.m, and we'll have to answer the call because
we're forced to.
Yeah.
We won't want to, but we will.
We must.
That's the key thing. We have to. Yeah.
Lovely.
Speak to you all next week.